Yeah, first I just want to say thank you to everybody who submitted questions. You guys submitted excellent questions, and we're glad to be able to answer those and help you in the process of discipling your kids. So, Phil, I just want you to share just quickly, just kind of some general, kind of what is your passion for ministry and what fuels your heart for children's ministry specifically?
Sure. There's a lot of answers to that. The first just comes from the fact that I didn't start following Jesus wholeheartedly till a little bit later in my life. And then when I did that, I just fell in love with him. And I can't imagine life without him. And so when I think and I see people struggling and going through life without him, it breaks my heart. And I think what a gift to be able to give that to a child so that they never have to know not having him and not loving him. So it starts there. And then from there, just the discipleship process. I grew up, and we did go to church, but church was a Sunday thing for us. So we had God on Sunday, and we kind of never heard about him the rest of the week. And went to a good church, people that loved the Lord and people that loved kids, but we would go to a basement and we would kind of hear stories, but we never really learned what to do with that. And as I became just in love with Jesus, I realized he wants to be a part of everything. And so I want to teach kids to love him and to live for him. They don't have to wait till they're down here with us. They need to live for him now, and that's what he wants. And so that just fuels my passion to teach them to love him and serve him at an early age.
What are just some general starting points that you can encourage parents to start taking with their kids?
Absolutely. I would say, you know what I'm going to say, is get them in church. Get them in children's ministry. We have an incredible children's ministry here, and there's lots of churches that have incredible children's ministry. So get them there. Bring them there. What I like about what we do is we really disciple them. We have fun, and we do it at their age level so that it's not just feeding them stories that they don't understand. It's playing games with them, but playing games with purpose so that they know, I can use this at school. I can treat people the way they want to be treated. We really emphasize discipleship with the kids, so get them in children's ministry here. We have 6th grade and down. So I know a lot of people have that old-fashioned, I want to have the kids with me in the sanctuary, and that's okay. But what I will tell you is they're not going to you wouldn't send your kid to college at 5 years old. And so send them upstairs and let us disciple them at a 5-year-old age level so that they know what to do with Jesus now.
Yeah, I'm not as fun down here as you are upstairs.
You are absolutely not even close
that.
to as fun as I am.
Yeah, as a parent, one of the things I'm so thankful for is my kids come home, and when we talk about what they learn in church, it's not concepts completely. It's really practical things. So when we're talking to our kids, they know how it applies to their behavior during the week. And a funny story is we had a kid in our church, so they learned Matthew 7:13, 7:12. I'm sorry. I should know that. Do unto others as you have done unto you, the golden rule, as it's often referred to. And so some kid at school had someone mistreat them and then treated them nice and came home and told their parents, I'm Matthew 7:12 them. Like it's a verb, okay? So
and it is a verb upstairs.
Yeah, so I love that.
It absolutely is a verb.
How would you say, just both Matt and Phil both, how would you say that LCC is kind of discipling kids or helping kids kind of learn to grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ?
I would say there's 2 layers to it. The first layer is we're discipling adults. And I think that's the part of it that is so important is the parents then have the responsibility to disciple their children. But if the parents are not disciples, then the truth is that children's ministry would be less effective. So children's ministry would have if a kid came every single Sunday and every single Wednesday for the entire year, you're still talking about 100 hours, 100, 150 hours that we would have with them. They have that much time in 1 week with a parent. So we are on the adult level trying to disciple adults, get them to understand the power of the Word of God, why they need to be studying it, power of prayer, power of worship, understanding that faith is more than a Sunday thing, it's throughout the week. So we're doing that on an adult level, believing that it's going to impact the whole family. So as we do that part, then to pass it on to Phil, then they're taking the children from there and taking it to the next level with the kids.
Right, and we try to provide a lot of parent resources. If you have a child in our ministry, you'll be familiar with something called the Parent Pack. And what that is it tells you everything we taught them on that Sunday. Then it gives you devotions, it gives you questions, it gives you fun things to do with them. That is so important if you have a child in these ministries to do that with them. Especially I hear parents say, I don't know what to do with my kids. I'm at a certain level myself. This gives you everything step by step, and you will absolutely learn. And I will even ask the children's ministry people in here, how many of you learn through these lessons that we teach of teachers? And a lot. And so you will learn, and that's okay. That's a good way to learn. We all learn that way. I learn something every time I teach from the lessons that God gives me. So we give you those those resources. And then the second, I would say our doors are always open. And I know you know that with Matthew, but me as well. I love to talk to parents. I love to have you ask me questions. I don't have all the answers, but I'll look for them and I'll find them and we'll work together. If you have special needs with your children and you're going through difficult times, I want to know that so that I know what to do and I can instruct our teachers to guide them in the right way, because every child is different and every home is different. So we give you these things that we hope you'll use.
Yeah, for sure. And as individuals come into the church, they come in whether new believers and all types of ranges. So if somebody's coming into the church, and is it ever really too late to start having spiritual conversations with your kids if, say, you're new to the faith?
I would say absolutely not. That just like it's not too late for you to learn about God and be discipled, the same is for your child. So don't lose hope if you feel like your child's too old to learn about God and you're too old to set an example for them. That's not true. And the same, I would say, if they're young, never let a moment go by that you couldn't be teaching them something. And I think the beauty, what Pastor Phil was saying, is that we learn as parents, just as the teachers learn as they're teaching. I've done devotions with my kids and learned something that I never knew before, and I've grown up in the church all my life. There's times I'll get something from a devotion, and I'll go write it down, like, that would be a good message for the current, and for the women's ministry. So you can always learn something as you are doing devotions with your kids, but don't be intimidated. If you're new to the faith, don't be intimidated that you don't know enough to teach your child, because you can learn together. And like he said, there's so many resources you can use to help you in that.
And as adults or as kids get older in that relationship with their parents, they're going to have that relationship for the rest of their life, and they're going to have conversations about so many things. I think it's very authentic for a parent, even late in life. So even if your kid is out of the home, so we're talking grown adults, to have a spiritual conversation with them is still powerful. To go to someone that you love and say, here's something I've discovered that's changed my life. We would do that with our friends no matter the age. So I don't think there's ever a stopping point where you can no longer have spiritual conversations. I would say just the opposite. It has just as much impact or more impact later on, where you say, my whole life I've lived one way, and now I've discovered there's something true or something more powerful, and explaining that to your kids.
You guys teach heavy in scriptures in the Bible. I know the kids are always memorizing scriptures and things, and there is a lot of heavy topics in scripture, particularly about heaven and hell and life and death and all those things. So if a parent, begins to have those discussions with their kids, or the kid begins to bring up questions about heaven and how that works, and how do you begin as a parent to have that discussion with your kids, and is that a topic that you talk with them about?
Let me get this. Andy Stanley, the pastor of Orlando, has a great quote. He says, all of the Bible is relevant, but not all the Bible is age appropriate. And so he uses the example. He's like, you're not going to teach a children's story on the story of David and Bathsheba, because it's a story about adultery and murder. And so I think the same thing. When we talk about some of the heavier topics, I don't know that every topic is age appropriate. So I think you need to use some wisdom in that. And we've joked about this. I mean, even some of the children's stories that we use, if we're really honest, are bizarre. Like David and Goliath. It's like we told our children that story 1,000 times, because they always, no matter what color or picture Bible that we had, they would pull it open to that story and read it. I mean, if you're really thinking about it, David kills Goliath and chops his head off. It's like, now go to bed, sweet child. Let that be on your mind. And even the story of Noah, and God kills everybody. It's like, good night.
We usually serve the snack right after that.
Yeah, exactly. But some of the deeper topics, I think you have to use a little bit of sensitivity with that. And as your child asks you questions, I think it's okay at times to say, if it gets too deep, too heavy, to say, answer that on their level, but to say, you know what, we're not going to dwell on that right now. We're going to focus on something else, and kind of shape the story of, so they want to know about hell. I mean, hell is not a concept I'm really going to go in deep with my children about. Not at the early age, but I am going to celebrate heaven. So I will more gear the conversation toward heaven and celebrate. You can have a relationship with God. You're going to then spend eternity in heaven with God. And so I think you just have to use some wisdom with that.
And I'll even add to that a little bit. When we talk about heaven with the kids, we really just focus on how much God loves them and how much we want them to love him and learn to get to know him and be his friend. And so we don't go a lot into details of what we think heaven looks like, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but we really just want them to love Jesus, because that's the result of loving Jesus and serving him, is that you're going to be with him forever. And so you're going to love where you're at with him, no matter where you're at. And so we really just emphasize more on just really focusing on Jesus is there and he loves you so much.
And what kids go through, will determine what conversations you need to have with them. So years ago, I had a friend that had a tragic loss in the family, and so all of the children started asking questions about that. Well, we couldn't avoid that topic then. And so there's a lot of good resources, as Phil offered earlier. You can reach out to him, how to talk to your kids about death and the afterlife. And so if they get exposed to something, then it is what it is. You have to address that. But I think, again, I don't think every single topic needs to be addressed with every kid early on in life.
Let's just continue on the topic of difficult conversations and that you oftentimes have with your kids. Particularly, let's talk about kind of relationships and sex in general. So how much would you say, Mary, would you say that you begin to have conversations with your kids? It's particularly about relationships. How much say do you have, I guess, in their lives when it comes to their relationships?
Well, as a parent, you have a lot of say in their life and what relationships they're going to be in. And when we're talking about kids getting older and dating relationships, because the children are living under your roof and you have roles. But I think in terms of when you should start that process, again, it is as the kids are just developing, and even as we were just talking about the last question, as they start asking questions, but also start pointing some things out. So our two oldest sons are getting towards the age where we just are approaching the subject of, hey, do you see how this person is so kind? Isn't that a nice attribute in a person? Isn't that something that you would want to look for in a relationship later down the road? Or talking things about...
Sounds like we're matchmaking.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying, like, do you see how that person reacted in this situation? That's really nice. Or I'll, even with Nora, say stuff about Matt, like, Dad is such a hard worker. Isn't that a good thing that he makes us
And you'll never
provides
find a
for
guy.
us? You'll
Ever.
be here all your life.
All your life. No one will ever be like Dad.
But they are just, and it is such a small amount that we're starting to talk about that, but as they get older, kind of guiding them and shaping them to what they can be looking for in a spouse, rather than just saying, good luck, I hope you find somebody that's good. And also, the most important, that they love God. We talk about that all the time, about wanting to make sure that you are in a relationship with somebody who loves God, that is their purpose. So I think as a parent, you also, even though you have the say, you could be a dictator, you also want to have an open relationship with them, where instead of saying, you will do this, you won't do that, you can help mold them and shape them so they can see what type of person they want to end up with.
Is there really an appropriate age to begin to have conversations with your kids about sex and relationships?
I don't think there's a set age, but I think, unfortunately, it's sooner rather than later now in our culture. So when I first became a youth pastor, now 17 years ago, when I first became a youth pastor, I remember Time magazine did a study on premarital sex, and it was the average age in the conversations was now in high school at that point. And then I remember when I first moved here now 12 years ago, it had moved down to where the conversation was about pre-high school sexual activity. And so it's unfortunately going lower and lower. So I think you have to be sensitive to that and address it with your kids. But I also think you have to gauge your own child's personality of how you communicate it with them. So again, I would say parents, you have to, I don't think there's I would say error on the side of this, but I would say it's going to be younger than you think, because you want to get that foundation so that when your kids get exposed to it, that they're prepared for it, and then you've already opened a dialogue so they come and talk to you. My experience in youth ministry is that most parents, I'm making up a statistic here, but I would say over 90% of the kids I've talked to said that this is in high school. My parents have never once had a conversation with me about sex. I will say they are having conversations about sex, so if you're not the one giving them truth, then what they're hearing is so distorted and so unhealthy, and so you want to open that dialogue with them and set the foundation at an early age.
Yeah, also along with that, the idea of modesty. I think they're getting exposed to just a modest, whatever it's in schools or just with culture and TV and all those things. So how do you begin to have that discussion with them about modesty?
Right. Just as you said, it is culture bombards our youth and even us with pictures of immodesty and celebrating immodesty. And so it's something that we have to be, again, so purposed about in raising our kids, and especially our daughters, to dress in a way that's modest, because that tends to be where culture targets the most is for women. And I don't think it's too young. I think it's okay to say, we're not going to wear that outfit today because that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate to wear out and about. In addressing it, it doesn't have to be something that's constantly addressed, but it has to be consistent so that your child knows what your boundaries are going to be and what the rules are for the home. And again, it's not too late to start. So if you haven't set boundaries in your home about dress and being modest, you can start now. And also just I remember myself pushing back on my parents, like, it's too hard, you can't find anything to wear that's modest. And that is a legitimate argument because it is difficult to find things, but just like we would teach the youth, it's not impossible. It sometimes just takes a little bit more effort. You can look stylish, you can look trendy, but still be modest in the way you're dressing and presenting yourself. But it's such an important art in our culture, and it's biblically based, and it's something that our youth are really fighting. And even younger, it's way younger than youth. My 4-year-old already is pushing the boundaries and sees things.
I know, God help me.
Sees things out if we're at the mall or shopping someplace, lots of clothes that are immodest for her age. So it's a difficult situation to be in, but it's one that takes purpose.
Yeah, for us with our daughter at an early age, we're establishing it now. Right now, the conversation is we're not giving her the why behind it as much as this is just the rules of our home. You're going to do this. But as she gets older, the conversation is going to be about why modesty is important, that her body is a beautiful thing, but it's a gift that one day she'll give to her husband the same way that his body he'll give to her. And that we've lost some sacredness to the bodies, our bodies, and how we expose and show them to everyone. And it goes against the design of God. And so we're trying to teach our daughter, and we will, and our sons too, it's just more of a female issue, is modesty is not just how you dress, it's how you conduct yourself. And so we want our children to be modest in their behavior so that one day when they have a marriage, they're giving this incredible gift to their spouse.
Say somebody, your son particularly, is dating someone who dresses a little bit immodestly. How do you begin to have that conversation, and how does that, is it a different conversation? How does that look?
Yeah, Mary and I had this, we had a friend of ours recently ask us about this. They said, our son is going to the prom, and the girl that he's going with, there's a good chance she won't dress appropriate. What do you think about that? And we started talking about, man, what are we going to do when our sons, get older? And I think we just have to have that conversation with our kids right up front to say, whoever you're going to go to prom with, and I don't know how to word. Okay, I'm going to be blunt here. I look at the prom dresses now, and I just, to me, I just think, again, this is a really, I'm just really trying to think, do I say it? I'm going to say it. When I just think, that would have been a real struggle for me as a 16-year-old boy if my girlfriend, who I was super attracted to, would have dressed that way. Like, it would have been very hard for me to stay pure in my mind and also just the whole process, And so we want to protect our sons' hearts and minds in that. So I think they need to have a conversation with their date ahead of time to say, here's the expectation of my home and family. And I know as I'm saying that, everyone's thinking, well, that's awkward, and maybe even outside of your authority to do that. But I think that's the rules that we're setting for our home is, like Cole and Titus and Lincoln, if you're going to go, you need to have this conversation. And so that we can talk about this at a time. And I would hope that they would be attracted to and already be in conversations with girls that do dress modest in general, because that's what attracted me to Mary. Very much so in high school was she always conducted herself modestly, always dressed modestly. And so that conversation is going to be an awkward one, but I think it's one you need to have.
Say a kid has already began to become sexually active and has kind of stepped over those boundaries or whatever, whether it's in the Christian home or not. How do you begin to kind of have that conversation with them, communicate that topic to them, especially if they're dealing with even kind of the after effect of that, the guilt, the shame, whatever comes along with that?
Yeah, I think as parents, it's just the first foundation is absolute love and grace. I think the worst thing you could ever do is to communicate you've now done something that's like we can't fix. Like, oh my goodness, you've done, I've heard of this, a story where parents are like, you've now given away your virginity, you can't get that back, and I'm ashamed of you, I'll never look at you the same way. That would be the most destructive thing you could ever do. Is it a sin? Absolutely. Is it a powerful sin? Absolutely. Paul says all other sins we commit are outside the body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. So there is some damage to it. But as a parent, your responsibility is to say, I love you. And if your kid is remorseful, I love you, and if your kid's not remorseful, then it's still the challenge of, here, let me communicate to you why sex is so powerful, why sexual purity is so important, and because you just never want your kid to feel shame around that topic. If they made a mistake and they realize it, you pouring on top of that's not going to help anything. So love them, and then just say, hey, let's talk about, this is the reality of where we are, but let's talk about where we go from here so that we cannot repeat that same mistake. So as a parent, the conversation is, all right, your next dating relationship, what can we do differently to protect you in that? So let's create some bigger guidelines and some boundaries so that you don't get into that same position again. But you want to give grace, absolutely, and then just have really purpose conversations about it.
Yeah, how do you communicate to, is it a wise thing to begin to put your daughter on birth control, or does that communicate something differently? What are kind of, the ways to approach that? Outside of medical reasons, of course, what are kind of approaches to that?
Yeah, and I want everyone to understand, we've kind of divided these questions, so I'm not just question hogging right now, okay? So Phil was like, Matt, you got that one. And
You got all the sex questions.
yeah, I know. That's pretty much what was determined. And so, birth control, so this is where I have to step back and go, let's go to the Bible and address this. And the Bible doesn't address that topic specifically. So at this point, anything I communicate would be my opinion. So a lot of this is my opinion, but a lot of it's rooted in Scripture. So in that one, do you put your child on birth control apart from for medical reasons? I know some girls get on birth control because of severe cramping and things during the menstrual cycle. And so do you do it? I would say my personal opinion is that seems unwise to me because you have now removed even one of the healthy fears, if I can word that way, the healthy fear of having sex. So if you remove barriers and then tell your kid, like so if you picture it like a barrier right here and it's really hard to jump over, and then you keep lowering it and then you say to your kid, but don't jump over that, I think that's unwise as a parent. So I personally would not put my child on birth control just as a protection, because I would think I'm communicating something almost like I'm going against what I'm trying to communicate. So my personal opinion is I wouldn't do that. You agree?
I agree.
Okay.
Well, let's get off of that topic, Phil, then, and we'll move on to discipline. So as far as you can have the most healthy, open, proactive relationship with your child, but we all still deal with the moments where we have to discipline our kids. So what is there a godly way of disciplining your children, and where do grace and discipline meet? I thought that was a great question. Where do they meet?
That is a great question. I fully believe in discipline. So, and you'll even see we have a very structured discipline system, even upstairs, different than what I would with my own children. But I believe that God is a God of structure and God is a God of discipline. And so also God is a God of amazing grace. And so we'll get a lot of times where someone will ask that, how do I raise my voice? Is it okay to raise my voice? And is it okay to lay down the law? And I say, absolutely it is. And you always, with my kids, when they've done something wrong, I want them to know they've done something wrong. I don't want them to go there again. I don't want them to, if it was temptation that was going to lead to sin, I don't want them to go to that sin, or I don't want them to sin again. And so it is very loving to say, I'm going to discipline you for this. At the same time, showing them how much I love you. I love you, and I'm not ashamed of you. I thought what Matt said about all that, not saying ashamed and not putting that on them, is a beautiful way to show grace. There are consequences, and so teaching the child the difference between consequences and grace is a very important thing to do. If you make a mistake, there's going to be a consequence to that. I still love you. God still loves you. He's a God of grace. He'll forgive you. But there will be consequences to what you've done wrong. And so I think it's just such an important balance to show them both of those things.
As far as team parenting, sometimes there can be just differences as how you view, how you discipline and those types of things. So, Mary, how do you work through that as parents if you differ a little bit on the way that you discipline your kids?
Right. Well, ideally, what you would be able to do is have a discussion with your spouse in private. I don't think it's beneficial to do it necessarily in front of the child as you're disagreeing, but maybe go in private and discuss and come up and compromise with each other to come up with a solution that you both agree with and that you're both comfortable with and that you think is the right choice. That doesn't always work, where you might still have that disagreement. And in a marriage that's God-centered, and what the Bible tells us is that the wife should submit to the husband, to where if you cannot come to a conclusion that the husband is the head of the household, the man is, and that he should make that decision. I think that would be, again, if you are in a marriage where you're able to communicate with each other, you love each other, you're both have the focus of God, I think that's very few times that will happen to where you can't come to a conclusion together. But I think that would be the end result. But I would just like we talked about last week, I would just encourage you to work on those communication skills and compromising and see each other's point of view so that you can come up with an answer.
Yeah, I mean, even as Mary says that, I don't know that we've ever, in our marriage, come to a point where she's like, okay, I'm going to defer to you because you're the husband. I think we've always been able to have a conversation and figure it out, which means sometimes she'll go, okay, you seem more passionate about it, I'll defer to you. And there are times she seems more passionate about this, and I'll say I defer to you. So I think in that relationship, if we were both super passionate, then I think as the head of the home, she should defer. But again, I don't think we've ever done that in our marriage. Got to a point where we couldn't just communicate through that.
We have a lot of single parents, mothers and dads here at LCC. So how does a single parent fulfill both role of father and mother?
I don't think you can. I don't think a mother can fill the space of a father and a father's space of the mother. But I think there's a lot of things you can do, and you do your role and your part the best you can. But I think that's the importance of the church. You surround yourself with, if you're a woman, you surround yourself with godly men to help your kids through. I think it's something important that we do here in children's ministry. And everybody might not know this, but I don't know what the statistics are, but most churches, when you go into children's ministries, it's usually women teaching.
Yeah,
I don't know if
it's close to 90% in most churches are women that do the volunteering.
And most of you, I'm sure, grew up with female Sunday school teachers, and females did all the children's ministry stuff. And I am so passionate that that's not how we want to do it here. We want to do both, because I want role models for the girls and I want role models for the boys. So
at our church, it's about what, 50-50, right?
It's 50-50 here. So we have 50% men and 50% women teaching your kids. I love that. So I say to you men, that's our responsibility to teach our kids. So don't fall into that old school thought of women do the children's ministry, women do Sunday school. So if you pray about that, if you feel like God's calling you to teach, please get with me. I want men and I want couples. I want men and women that are strong together in our ministry. So my answer to that is use the church, use the resources of your friends and your connect groups, and use whoever you are. If you're a man and you're a single father, then use those godly women influences for your daughters and vice versa.
Last week we touched on a little bit about the role of in-laws and how we begin to set boundaries in those relationships, particularly with marriage in general. But in terms of when the child becomes an adult and they begin to grow up and they begin to get a job and those types of things, but they're still living with you. So does that differ as far as parenting? Does that differ or change any?
You know what's funny? We laughed about this last week. Of all the questions that was asked, when Brandon asked one about in-laws, the entire room went, oh. I don't know why. It was like we asked all these controversial questions, but that was the one that got the most response. As a parent, as a child gets older in the relationship, I think on both sides of it, so from the child's perspective and from the parent perspective, they have to start to transition what that relationship looks like. And so if we were to just describe the normal situation is 18, there starts to be some independence, and oftentimes 18 to 22 range is when they start to move out, typically around 22 and maybe a little bit older. The child moves out, and now they're starting their own life. So if you're following that rhythm where the child is moving out, I think as a parent you start to give more freedoms, and then you start to have a conversation of what that looks like. And so I think the child needs to have conversations with the parents if they're too overbearing, and as they're moving out, as they're getting on their own, they need to have conversations with their parents of setting those boundaries. But I think also the parents have to set boundaries themselves, where they start to realize my child has moved out, now it's a different role. We are going into a new season, a season of love, and a season of both on adult, so there's maturity there. You're still going to help and you're still going to give guidance because the kid, hopefully if it's a healthy relationship, is going to come to you. And so there's just that dynamic. Both need to set boundaries. But I would say this, and this is where I think people can err, is if the child is still living in your home, you still have to set the rules for your home. And I don't think they need to be as strict as when you were a kid, but I think there are some rules that you should still set. So I'll give you an example. So something my dad did, and I'll tell you kind of a funny story. So I didn't have a curfew growing up. I'm the youngest of two brothers, and so my parents never set an absolute curfew, but they would just have conversations. So they would say, "What are you doing tonight?" Part of it, how many of you are the youngest child? Do you guys realize your rules were different than your older siblings? And so there's some of that dynamic that my brothers, who had behaved well, so they didn't ruin it for me. So I didn't have a curfew. So we'd have a conversation. They would say, what are you and Mary doing? I would tell them. They'd say, okay, you need to be home by midnight, or you need to be home, whatever. So when I came back from college my freshman year, me and my brothers were going out, and my dad stops us at the door, and he goes, what time you guys are going to be home? And we were like, what? And he goes, what time you guys going to be home? We're like, what do you mean? And he's like, tonight. And we're like, I don't know. He's like, well, are you going to be home by curfew? And then he looks at us, and he goes, do you guys have a curfew? And I go, no. He goes, oh, okay. So, like, he thought he had to do the dad thing, you know, and so he didn't. But here's the other side of the story, is my dad had some house rules. And the house rules he had that I very much respected is that he said, if you're going to live with me, so this is even when my brothers moved back in after college. They moved back in for a season, and they moved out. He said, if you're going to live with me, you have to go to church. And so even if they were not following God, they still knew this is the house rule. If you're going to live with me, even if you're 30, you're going to go to church. And so they honored that. One other quick story I'll tell us quickly is, so my dad had another rule that there was no rated R movies in our home. And so do you guys remember way back when there was this thing that they would send you a VHS tape, a rated R movie, or a movie, and you could pay like $10 a month, and they would send you a couple of videos. You guys know what I'm talking about, that thing? Columbia House. There we go. Something like that for movies. So my brother Chris signed up for that. But the thing was, if they sent you a movie and you didn't want it, you could send it back. And so they would just send rated R movies at times. My dad would get the mail, see the rated R movie, and just throw it away. Never even told my brother Chris. And so like after a while, my brother Chris keeps getting these bills that are getting larger and larger. And he's like, I'm not receiving these movies. They're like, we're sending them to you. And so one day he goes to my dad and says, by chance, are you seeing these movies? My dad goes, yeah, you know the house rules. I threw them away. Chris is like, I could have sent them back. He's like, they shouldn't have sent them here in the first place. And so that was a house rule. But in that dynamic, I would say if you're a parent and your child lives with you, set some house rules. So like about your conduct, what's expected, even what your responsibilities are going to be around the home. If you're not going to charge them rent, there's still responsibilities. So I think you just have to have that conversation with your kids.
Are there any final thoughts that anybody would like to share on regards to any of those topics that we talked about today?
I would say, to reiterate what Matt said at the beginning, that we are all still in the process of parenting and learning how to do it. We're making mistakes. But I would encourage you to really take advantage of the resources here, so the pastors here, and then also additional resources. I read a lot about parenting. I listen to Focus on the Family a lot about parenting. I talk to people who I respect, who I think that they've done a really good job raising their kids. I ask them questions. I kind of say, what would you do in this situation? People that are kind of mentors in my life, family members. So I would just encourage you, don't try to do it alone. Just like we said last week in marriage, don't try to do it alone in marriage. Reach out for help, and I would say the same thing for parenting, because it's a hard process, and we make mistakes constantly, but we're thankful for God's grace, but we need to still keep being purposed about it so that we can get better.
Yeah, we're doing a relationship series in the fall, and so I'm going to talk on parenting one of the days. But what I'm going to stress with all the families is parenting begins with purpose. So we have purpose in so many levels with our children. So we have purpose in their academics. I'm an athletic coach, and I like sports, so I have purpose in sports. We have purpose even in some of their social development and their ability to have communication and talk and stuff like that. So we have purpose and goals in all these areas. But I think the same thing is, in my experience, is sometimes the spiritual goals are lacking. So I think as parents, you need to sit down and think about what is the ultimate destination that you want your child to be. So what's the goal? And then develop a purpose to get there. So you can't leave it to chance. A kid will not academically just become a good student. There needs some parent involvement in that, some oversight and some encouragement, some tutoring. Same thing spiritually. So you need to have spiritual conversations. You need to communicate this with the kids. You need to communicate the why behind it. So not just here are the rules of our home, but why are the rules? Why are we doing this? And to help shape your kids. And so you need to have purpose, but then you also have to prioritize. And that's something I'm going to stress a lot in the fall. Is you can't just say, here's a goal, because if we have 10 different goals in different areas, so we have academics, we have athletics, we have spiritual goals, we have social goals, one of those has to trump the other ones. And in families, there has to come a point where you say, this is now the priority. And when that becomes a priority, what I would obviously say is spiritual has to be the priority. So spiritual trumps school, spiritual trumps sports, spiritual trumps everything else, because spiritual is going to go with your child for eternity. I think the worst thing we could ever do is to have our kids successful here on earth to not be prepared for eternity. They would be the most selfish of parenting moves. And so as you sit down and set those goals, then set the priorities. What trumps what? And then I think you'll start to see some gains in that area. And so, but it just won't happen on accident, and so you need to be very purposed about it.
Would you like to close us in prayer? Or Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to take just a little bit more on that. When you set spiritual goals, even for your younger children, I hear people say all the time, I want them to love God. That is not a goal. That is a result of the goals. So if I say I want to get in shape, that's not a goal for me to get in shape. That's the end result. So I'm going to set the goals of, I'm going to work out so many times a week. I'm going to do these things. So if you want your kids to love God, work on those spiritual goals and make sure it's not just I want them to love God, because it's what you read to them, what you talk to them about, the conversations, the things they're watching, where you're sending them to church. Are you talking about the lessons they learned? Are you teaching them how to use it at school and when they're out in other places? And so it's set those spiritual goals.
Absolutely.
Would you like to close us in prayer, Matthew?
I'm gonna let Phil do it. Why don't
Okay,
Phil do
love
it?
to. Lord, we love you so much. God, I'm just so grateful for all that you are to us. God, I thank you for this church. I thank you as I looked at these faces today, for these people that love you, that love each other, that love this church. I thank you for what you're doing here, God. I thank you for the gift of our children. And God, I just ask you just to continue to give us your guidance. And Lord, help us, if anything anyone heard today, help them to hear, to seek you in their parenting. And when they seek you, you'll guide them and you'll take them where they need to go. And so God, we ask you for that. We ask you just to lead us and to be with us through our parenting. Lord, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you are to us. And we pray all this in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen.